Hey guys, Igor here. I'm back with another video, and today we're focusing on foliage. Now, before I start drawing stuff, let's take a quick look at foliage that I've drawn in other images. So let's take a look at a more recent one that includes quite a bit of leaves and bushes and all that. So taking a close look at this stuff is just a bunch of strokes, and believe me when I say a bunch of strokes. It took me a couple of hours probably to go through and add all these little, lines everywhere. So you have more of these little leaves that aren't just straight lines, so it's not as boring to look at. You know, you've got all these little shapes, and I'll show you how I do that. And then finally on this side we've got a little bit more leaves. Again, it's just a variety of different colors. You know, the under parts of the bushes would probably have less light so that they're a darker, more saturated green. Here's a more recent painting. I haven't finished it yet, and I might even work on it in this video. What you see is a lot of grass, and it encompasses this giant caterpillar in the middle. And if I turn on the sketch layer, you can see that there's ants that are bringing him food or leaves. And yeah, that was sort of the idea for the painting. But you could see, again, just very broad strokes using for the brush I used I'm not even going to try to pronounce that. Anyways, so I played around with the artistic brushes, which have quite a bit of texture. I wanted to block shapes in, and this was kind of like the result. I'm not done with it yet, but soon enough. So let's create a new document, and we'll play around with foliage a little bit. We'll talk about, you know, the structure of stuff. Let's also take a quick look at some references. I'm just going to pop them up on screen. So ultimately what I want to talk about is the difference that you see in the light that hits the different leaves. So we have a very bright piece, and we have a much darker green one. And the difference is, some foliage, you have to keep in mind, will be more translucent than others, basically less sparse leaves, and then you'll have trees that are really, really dense. So the structure of a leaf, right, normally for me, whenever I draw, keep in mind, guys, that if you want to learn how to draw stuff really, really realistically, your best bet is to, first of all, maybe take some advice from a realist painter who will just tell you to focus on the lighting aspect, like light and how it affects the object, and look at references of real life stuff. But if you want like a more cartoony vibe, a more stylized look that, you know, artists will tend to resort to when they're working on their pieces, you know, if it's a concept artist, he'll quickly want to block in some foliage or something. So kind of the general understanding of the structure of the leaf is you have the stem, and then you have the little pieces that come out of that. And the way that I like to light these, if I'm going to be lighting it, let's draw a couple of different things, right? So we'll have the dirt right here, and then from that we'll stem out a few grass blades. Again, the outside edge of the blades will probably be less dense and therefore have smaller kind of baby grasslings. I don't really know what they'd be called. So we'll have a little patch of grass, and then what's another thing? And then let's do a tree, right? Because the tree is pretty important. So we'll see how I would tackle all of these things. None of this is pre-planned. It might not work, you know. I'll just retry it because it's a video. I can always pause and undo and redo. Because ultimately, that's kind of what it comes down to, right? It's whether you like it or not. Alright, so whatever. We'll block in a tree stump, and then I'll save the leaves for whenever we do that. Now, I'll create a new layer. I'm going to go on top of the sketch this time instead of underneath it. And for the brush, I always use the round brush, but let's grab something with a little bit of texture. I like it. It looks good too. So for leaves, whenever I'm coloring them, what I keep in mind is obviously lighting. So for this leaf, because of the way it's structured, the stem in the middle is kind of a recessed point. So that means if light is on the right side here, if it's coming from this side, then if the leaf is folded inwards, if it's doing this, right, and then the light is coming from this side, then this side of the leaf, let me grab a lighter color, then this side of the leaf would be brighter than that side. So in this sense, we have the leaf being folded over, and therefore, if I go a little bit warmer, now let's get less saturation, then this side of the leaf would be lighter. But not only that, if the leaf is somewhat folded, if it isn't a V shape, if it's more of a, I don't know, a little dip, like a smooth recess, then the outer edge would most likely be facing whatever our light source is. And not only that, but a little bit of that shadow would gradiate down towards the stem. Now this leaf doesn't even have the little lines that I don't really know what to call them. I guess smaller stems that will root from the leaf. And honestly, you don't often have to put these into your piece because it mainly depends on how detailed are you trying to go. You know, are all of your leaves, like, is your scene really zoomed in? If your image is a single bug on a leaf, then yeah, maybe you can justify spending some time adding very minor details like the stems and the different veins or whatever that the leaves could have. It's definitely something that you can kind of skip over. Now, another thing to consider is we have a white background. Since we have a white background, if I want to stay kind of true to leaves and why they look the way they do, it means that this leaf should be a lot more translucent. It should show some of that white through it. But because it's not super thin, it's not really, it's not a crystal, you don't get all of that white color. So you can grab some of this white, mix it in, pick up a subtle version of it, and incorporate that into your leaf. So that's also another possibility. And obviously, see, if you look from further away, the leaf is starting to take shape. Again, this is a huge leaf, right? It's taking up like a good 16% of my painting or so. Normally, these would be tiny. They'd be somewhere along these lines, right? And then if you want some that are highlighted, that are facing your light source, you can hit them with that brighter color and then grab this darker color and fill in any crevices. But I'll do that on the tree part, so let's not get ahead of ourselves. Alright, the leaf. Overall, it's whatever to me. Like right now I feel like, obviously not the best leaf I've ever drawn in my life. But just so you understand the basic structure of how I do my leaves is you get the stem, you have the direction of the little leaf part itself and where it goes, and then you just figure out from there, where do I want my lighting and my shadows to hit. Is this, if there's another leaf directly below this one, let's say if it's coming off of the same stem but just in a slightly up higher position, and let's say it's an even smaller leaf, or like the little tail part of it flips downwards, we're gonna draw out where the stem would go, And then from there, I'd grab the darker color, but the difference is I would keep this darker color for most of the leaf, and only the edge that pokes out a little bit further than the leaf on top of it is going to get the highlighted part, to show that this leaf has shadow that's being cast down on it. Let me finish this up and then I'll show you guys what I'm talking about. Yeah, basically I'm grabbing this darker color, filling in any unwanted white spots that I've missed. So, yep, that's basically how I would start building a bunch of leaves. Then obviously you can have even more, and then if this leaf was to stick out further, it might be, let's say, folding backwards. If it folds backwards, then you'd have the opposite effect. You'd have the darker side on the inside, on the left side, and then the plane that faces the highlight, which in this case would now be the right, it would have the highlight. And you could also make the part by the stem get softly darker, or shade it a little bit, and that'll help you show that it's being folded. It's rolled. You can obviously turn up the contrast by using a slightly darker color to help you point out all of these areas that are recessed down lower. And then, since our leaf is folded inwards here, I'm going to grab the highlight again and go along the inside a little bit. So once you've got the base colored in, you can grab a darker color and then go and do the side stems. And the cool thing is, if you want to even further exaggerate the anatomy of this leaf, you could even grab this lighter color and make the stems indented individually, but I'm not going to bother with that because, again, it's going to be spending a lot of time on something that is essentially pretty straightforward. I would say there's no like hidden thing to doing these properly. You just have to understand light and how it would affect a thin little organic object that, you know, stems from a stem, which stems from a tree. Now, I could even, if I wanted to, show translucency by very lightly lighting up the part of the leaf that kind of has the leaf that's behind it being lit up by the sun, if that makes sense. So this leaf right here and the leaf right behind it, you see how this area, let me grab a white color, sure. So this area right here overlaps, but the light area on this back leaf goes all the way down to here approximately, right? So that means this area on the leaf that overlaps can be a little bit lighter to show that the leaf underneath, you can see some of those highlights through it. So that's also another thing to think about. And then in the same case, you could argue that this leaf needs to be made a little bit darker. The highlights shouldn't be as prominent, because if it's a thin leaf, then the highlights would be toned down because of what's behind it. So it's how light plays with all these objects. Just for curiosity's sake, I'm going to grab an even lighter green. Let's go with something like this, and I'm gonna try to hit all the parts that have no leaves behind them, and we'll see how that turns out. Just a little experiment. I probably should have changed the background color to something like a light blue, and that would help illustrate the transparency a little bit. Along this leaf, which has nothing behind it too. And there you go. That's kind of the overall vibe that I'm getting for this leaf. I mean, if you look at it from far away, it's not too bad, right? I'm doing this without a reference. I'm kind of just scribbling from my head and trying to incorporate as much elements that I would think that a real leaf has. Obviously, it's far, far from looking super realistic, but you know, this is essentially how I draw things. I'm not telling you the right or wrong way of doing it. I mean, maybe I am telling you the wrong way of doing it, but my intention is to just show you how I do it, and then from that you make your own conclusions and you play around and you test out what you like. You know, be nitpicky, criticize my stuff, because that's how you'll improve. You know, you figure out, okay, this artist did this wrong and I know they did this wrong, so instead I'm going to do this. And then if you get feedback that supports what you thought, then you're like, oh shoot, I was actually right. So good stuff, you know. Alright, moving on. Let's say the leaf is done, right? Whatever, we've drawn some leaves. Grass blades. So for the grass blades, let me at first just shade the background a little bit and drop a bit of white behind this leaf so that we know that it's being lit up by a white background and not by a gray one. And now I'll just merge that down and keep it there. And now for the grass blade, I'm going to create a new layer. Sure, we'll put this one underneath, why not? And I'm going to grab some sort of dark rich brown for the soil. So this will be lit by a little bit more of a gray color, overcast. So let's drop some of that in there. Now create a new layer and let's grab some green. We'll start pretty dark right away. Why not? So for grass, you know, you've got the usual kind of, there's people that do this. I think that's a bit too uniform unless the grass was mowed by, you know, a lawnmower, or it's turf, you know, something artificial. But in the real world, grass blades overlap each other. They're varying in length and size and color. So it's a good idea to just mix things up, you know, grab a couple of different colors and show highlights on different areas. So for this piece, let me drop a highlight indicator, and it'll be from the top left. So it'll come from somewhere around here. That's where the lighting is focused around. Alright, great, great, great. Okay, now back to our grass patch. I'm going to change back to the artistic brush. Again, I'm using the Jasinski ink. I don't know. Probably butchered that. I'm not really good with reading names and all that, so forgive me if I'm way off. So for the grass area, first I like to block it in, because working, you know, to find points isn't always that easy, even with a Apple Pencil that's supposed to give you sensitivity and all that and finer controls. It's finer controls, but I personally am still kind of iffy about how to apply dynamic sizing of the brush. So if you press lightly, you know, it gets really small, and then if you push down harder, it'll get the stroke gets much larger. But I don't know, I found it kind of finicky, so I tend to keep it to a minimal on most of my brushes. Alright, now I can zoom in a little bit, and I'm gonna go ahead and still go over the sketch layer. I'm actually gonna turn the sketch layer off for now. I think they're kind of interfering. Sometimes I'll keep them, but I don't think I need them here. It's just grass blades. So what I'm looking for is how this grass is growing in the dirt, right? What's causing what shape? So if we have this bigger piece right here, that's 2 grass blades. And you have to also keep in mind, you're not drawing on a flat plane. Some stuff will be overlapping other things. So let's put this grass blade right here at the very front. And I'm going to grab a darker color to help separate this piece of grass from the grass blades that are right behind it. Now, what other grass blades am I putting in approximately the same, on the same side? And I figure, why not this one? And then lastly, let's do this edge one right here. So these are going to be my most closest grass blades to the viewer. And I'm going to grab a little bit of dirt and help dig these into the ground. It's good to have some varying heights within the dirt. Alright, now this really thick piece of grass blade would probably be taller in real life. Again, if you want to make your stuff realistic, I strongly advise you to use references and not copy, but apply what, you know, the shape looks like into your painting. And you can match up a bunch of different photos and mix different, you know, bushes and trees and all that into it, and you'll probably get a very convincing result. So this is more to show you how I approach dynamically drawing this stuff, like kind of just coming up with it and putting it on paper. So another thing I like to do is, let's say this grass looks kind of boring. I mean, it's grass. I'm not good enough to make something like that look really interesting, but I can bend back some of the pieces, and the pieces that are bent are now have a surface area that's able to collect more of this highlight. So because of that, we've got some highlight being casted onto it. So we grab this lighter color. So that's a thing. And then now grass is also pretty thin, a single blade. If you think about it, you can see a good amount of sunlight through it if you especially pick it up and look towards the sun with it. So it's pretty important to have areas that are single grass blades to be lit up with this brighter color. Now areas again that overlap can have less of this, because there's now more things in the way between the grass blade and the highlight itself, and the light source itself. So it's kind of applying certain rules, and it's not limited to just foliage. You have to keep that in mind. Anything that's, you know, on its own able to be a little bit transparent, when it's stacked with more of the same thing, like a piece of paper, you like imagine one piece of paper over a lamp, right? It'll dim the light a little bit, but if you put a whole Yellow Pages book, then you won't be able to see anything. So in the same sense, you know, when a tree has a ton of leaves, it's going to be quite a dark green because you can't see much light through it. And then when a tree has very little leaves, like in the spring or in the fall, well, you're going to be able to see almost everything through it. Alright, so here I am going in, grabbing some darker greens along the base of the grass blades where it's much less likely to pick up any light. And not only that, but again, more grass blades in that area, so that would mean that it's causing darker tones to appear. Alright, now getting to this grass blade here, I think I went a little bit too dark, at least for the most of it, for the most part. So I'm going to grab a little bit of that lighter color, go along the rim, grab the darker color to clean out the shape, and use an eraser to sharpen the point on the grass blade. If this grass was cut, I might go in and do something like that, and do that for you know, multiple pieces. And I always enjoy that, like being able to draw something in its entirety and then, oh, you know, like I drew a car. Oh no, the car was hit or was shot, so let's tear the door off. So all I do is redraw the door as it would look, you know, damaged. And same with this grass blade. You know, I drew in the blade and then I'm like, well, what if it was what if a lawnmower came over it? It'd be chopped. So then you just chop it off like you would with a lawnmower, and it still looks fine because that's what happens in real life. It's like you're applying realistic kind of procedures to make something look believable. I don't know. I enjoy doing stuff like that. So now I'm going to lighten this grass blade up a bit because, well, it isn't facing the highlight, but again, it's pretty thin, and this translucent part would need to be a little bit lighter. So you can start to see how this takes shape, right? It's very time consuming because I'm, you know, spending a lot of time detailing a really minor piece of foliage. But that's why we're going to do the tree next, because hopefully that helps you guys and helps me describe the process that I normally do so that you can benefit from it. So for the dirt, I'm going to highlight parts of the dirt that would also be hit by our light source, and then you would have some cast shadows behind the grass, so we'll avoid going too close to it. And then look at that. If you show that to somebody, they might actually say, hey, that looks like grass. And I'll be like, yup, that's what I was going for. Okay, so lastly, I think I want to, that cut up part looks really, really dark. So I'm going to brighten that. And then we'll move on. Okay, lastly, we've got the tree. First thing I'm going to do before I start on the trees, I'm going to erase the sketches. They're no longer really necessary here. And we'll get to drawing the tree. Now the tree will work in a very similar fashion. We'll just grab some of this brown. Tree trunks and all that are sort of a topic of their own, because I know that if you ask somebody who studies nature or just really loves trees, you know, they can tell you why a tree grows the way it does and whatever shapes form. Again, this is just taken from my head, so anatomically and proportionally, right, the branches and stuff might be way off, but that's okay because I'm going off of what image I have in my head. So it's definitely not a real representation of what a tree looks like, but that doesn't mean that anybody who sees the painting would think for some reason that it's a dog, right? If that's the case, then I most likely messed up quite a bit throughout whatever I was doing. So trees and tree trunks and stuff tend to have some really dark contrasting areas because it's a more solid object. Light does not easily pass through any parts of this. Even a thin branch is not at all transparent. So just something to think about. And in that same regard, you have highlights that are much more prominent too, right? If you have a tree trunk that, say, kind of curves and twists and has holes, there's a ton of textures on tree trunks. Really, really rough. But if you break it down into big shapes, it all becomes manageable. Again, remember, what scale are you working at? Is this a zoomed in tree trunk? Do you have trees that are miles away? If it's miles away, you simplify it down to this. Look, you do a stroke, maybe two. You grab some green. You fill in, you know, the approximate shape. This is actually how I would do a tree that's far away, and there might be a couple of them. And then you have your highlight. Because again, it's a big piece. Imagine all those leaves being compact, tightly knit. They kind of get affected as a whole object when lighting hits them. And then the dark areas, and because we're using the texture brush, you see how it kind of creates little leaflets on its own. Now because of that, there you go, you've got yourself a nifty little tree. And that can be done in all sorts of shapes and other good stuff. So let's go back to this tree. I'm going to try a different brush. I don't experiment too much with these brushes, but we'll see if we find something we like. I mean, look at that. That thing is, if you stack this enough, you can definitely make this look like a tree, because the exterior texture of this looks like leaves that are being layered. And then you grab a slightly lighter color, and guess what? It starts to build. So again, you're building this big object, and then when you have your highlight, which is, let's say, on the right side, just like on the little tree, you'll have the edges of the foliage picking up these highlights. Now, parts that aren't highlighted, that have no light at all, could become very, very dark indeed. So that's something to consider. I don't really care too much for this brush. Let's try something else. Old Paint is a very texture heavy brush, but it would work so well for a willow style tree. So let's delete that foliage. That's why I created a new layer. And then look at this. And in the same concept, first we have the majority of the tree, majority of the foliage in place, and then look what you can do. So we've got the foliage in place. You just lock this layer, swipe it to the right, grab a lighter color using the same brush, and guess what? You've now got a little bit of highlights on it. I mean, obviously clean it up, but I just did this in like 10 seconds. Delete that. Let's try something else. I think we can even use this brush for a completely different look. Man, this brush is actually really, really sick. I've used it before, just not for this reason. So again, if you keep this in mind, the long strokes along the bottom here kind of remind me of more of a jungle type tree. Let's get rid of those for now, and let's get rid of our sketch layer altogether, because some strokes are still left over. And another thing to keep in mind is trees will often have a very tall canopy, I guess if that's what it's called, and along there you might see some of the branches poking through. So another thing you could also do is use the trunk layer, go underneath that, and just drop a few pieces of leaves there. And you can also grab a darker color, because again, remember, keep in mind that you're trying to think of this as a big object, right? Leaves are encompassing the entire thing, so leaves that are near the initial trunk, the branches, would be darker because they're getting the least amount of light, regardless of what side it's being shaded from, unless you have a light bulb underneath it. Now, when I was talking about the branches that poke through, you can just do that. You can grab whatever brush you used, and then figure out what your branches might look like. They would be more prominent towards the top most likely, because again, less leaves, and those leaves would be lighter because there's less of them, so there's less stuff restricting from light to get in there. And then you go back with your leaf brush or some other sort of texture brush and cover up pieces, because leaves go everywhere, so it's a cool little dynamic. Trees are very much alive, and you'll never find one that looks exactly like another. So go out there, draw some trees from real life, bring your iPad, bring your phone, draw on a piece of paper, take a look at them. I don't do that often myself. I've probably done it maybe a handful of times in my life, but I can see why there are people that do just that, is you learn a lot. So another thing I want to mention before we kind of end it here is don't worry about stuff hanging in midair, right? You've got tiny leaves that are connected by a stem, and you're looking at them from hundreds of feet away. To the human eye, if there's anything behind it, you won't, if there's like a light source behind it, right, behind the tree, you won't see those tiny stems at all. So it's perfectly fine to include a couple of those strokes in there. We see that here, but when you look far away, yeah, I guess if you want to focus on it, you'll be like, oh no, that thing is floating. But realistically, as the whole picture comes together, you don't really notice it. So if I merge that down, and then I can go in it with the eraser and clean up any parts that I don't particularly like. For example, fix some of the hanging stuff. Let's merge this trunk down with the rest of the layers. Going back in with an eraser, textured eraser, over a textured brush stroke that you've made often adds even more texture. So that's a cool little trick, I guess, if you ever want to do that. Now, what sort of doesn't make sense if I am to add the highlight on this side is, if you look, our tree trunk is being lit from the left side. So if I want to be consistent, I would grab a lighter color for the leaves, and I would place them mainly around the left side. And that's it, guys. That is basically how I would tackle foliage. Again, this obviously doesn't cover things like bushes and maybe some like flowers and all that, but ultimately it's the same concept. Petals, flower petals are pretty translucent and they'll pass light through them. Bushes are miniature-ish type of trees. You've got jungles and all sorts of interesting things that get affected by light. And that's ultimately kind of what I just wanted to talk about, is lighting. I can't say it enough. It might be annoying to some people, but that's because I don't know. It's true. It is pretty annoying, but ultimately, if you're good at that, then you'll be good at drawing pretty much anything out there. Okay, guys. As always, thanks for watching. We will have another video similar to this in the near future, so stick around, like, share, subscribe, and continue being cute.